Well, it's a good evening here from Johannesburg as we do this webcast. And I'd like just to say that we do these webcasts that you've been seeing on the BU Assembly website. We've been doing it here from BTC's studio. They've got some lovely studio setups here. And so just as a matter of advertising to all our churches, especially up here in Joburg, if you need help to do some sort of webcast or webinar activity, just remember to use BTC. It's a real privilege to work with quality equipment and quality guys here, helping us do the kingdom's work. And so as we're approaching assembly time. It's getting quite close now. And as one of the webcasts that we want to put out before the assembly is a webcast covering what are the Board of Governors doing. And there's been a lot of questions around the Board of Governors over the past year or so. The Board of Governors came in at the last assembly officially, was part of the new constitution and the implementation of the new structure. And with me this evening, I've got Gary Tamlin. And welcome, Gary.
Hi, Colin. Thank you for having me.
And Gary's going to do all the talking. I want to ask some questions, and we're going to find out who are the Board of Governors and what have they been doing, and what is their value to the Baptist Union of South Africa and the churches as we minister the gospel in this country. And so we don't want to take up much more time than that. And Gary, we're going to start kicking off and remind us, Gary, of who is on the Board of Governors at the moment that serve the Baptist Union.
Colin, thank you. And thank you for tuning into this webinar and giving us an opportunity to touch base on this as we head towards an exciting assembly that's coming up. So the governors, as appointed at the last assembly, are currently Stephen Paddy, Professor Robert Vivian, Yolanda Ford, Cliff Marshall, and myself, Gary Tamlin. And within that governing board, Stephen was elected by the members of that board to serve as the chairman of that committee for this year, and I was asked to be the secretary for 2022. We meet at least once a month, usually every third Thursday, and more often if needed. We have some invitees as well, of which you are one as the national administrator, and then Greg as the NLA chairman also attends, and those are really helpful to us just to create that continuity between the committees, bearing in mind the governors are a new entity and in a sense under a very clear mandate are putting the foundations in for what we would hope is a very effective body in the future.
And I think it's been a year. I know I've sat in most of your meetings, and so we've had to establish many things as to what is important and what is less important to the Board of Governors, and how do you serve the Baptist Union. At the last BU Assembly, the governors were given a mandate, a very clear one, as you mentioned already, from the new BU Constitution that came in. And how have they implemented that mandate? How far have we got with it?
So, Colin, I think, there's quite a lot in the Constitution, but the essence of the mandate in 10.1 reads, the function of the Board of Governors is to provide oversight and control of the National Leadership Council and the Board of Trustees. They are responsible for all aspects of corporate governance, including internal compliance and control, legal compliance, risk compliance, audit and strategic risk, capital management and financial reporting approval. They have a duty to file statutory returns. And so we've embraced that. And what we've done is we've tried to establish workflows and committees off the back of those specific focus areas. We've got a legal committee that Cliff Marshall, with his legal background, is heading up. We have an audit committee that Robert, Vivian and myself have been working on to support Garth Coppin's efforts in terms of the finance committee. And then we have a corporate governance and compliance committee that Yolanda Ford and myself are working on, and that incorporates risk as well. We have the Board of Trustees that Stephen Paddy and Cliff Marshall liaise with as well. And then we have the finance committee that, on behalf of the Board of Governors, Stephen Paddy sits on, Garth Coppin chairs. But as a governor board, within their responsibilities defined, those different individuals are responsible and are building clear understanding of the responsibility of those committees, responsibility of the governors, and also cascading it down where those committees will have clear defined purposes and accountabilities in conjunction with the day-to-day running, with the NLC, with yourself, and without clogging up the system, making sure that things are a lot more compliant in a worldly sense, but in a sense that is required by us. I just mentioned to you that when we looked around us at other non-profit organizations and in a very messy world that is having more and more regulation put on it, we found a document called the Independent Code of Governance for Non-Profit Organizations in South Africa. It's not King 4 compliant for those who are really deep into this, but it's a very good starting point for us, and I think it's enough to keep us busy for now. And so we've adopted that as a template to put those different pieces in place in order to create right processes and right procedures, and in a sense create a foundation for the Baptist Union to be compliant with the world we live in South Africa. I think the second mandate that we were given outside of the broader mandate to establish the committee, which I think is done, although, for example, the audit committee hasn't quite got going yet. There's a number of committees where we need to bring in some other people and do a few things, but it'll come. It just takes a little bit of time. Was the specific mandate that was brought in the motion by Reverend Shane de Lange, and that motion read, in order to give meaningful effect to the new structure of the Baptist Union adopted at the 2018 Assembly and to render the structure functional, we propose that amendments tabled at the BU Constitution and its bylaws be accepted by the 2021 Assembly for a period of 3 years. As soon after the 2021 Assembly as is reasonably possible, the Board of Governors shall appoint a representative subcommittee of no more than 10 persons who are authorized to meaningfully reassess, and it goes on. I think we all know what it is. And so we've been busy trying to unpack and get the whole Board of Governors to a point where they fully understand where the 2016 committee got to, what was presented to the Assembly, what was accepted, where people found it very difficult and hard to implement, perhaps some of the unresolved issues around networks and a few other things. And the Board of Governors have reached a point where that committee is now being established. It's made up of the 5 governors who feel it's that important they should all be on it. They've included the NLC chair in Greg. They've included yourself as the national administrator, again, with the idea of creating continuity into the NLC. And we're going to invite 3 additional members. We've got acceptance from 2. One is Charles de Kivit, and the other is Safisa Jali. And we have some invites out to a few other people which we're waiting to hear back from. We've had obviously declines from people who are too busy, which I think is all normal. But our ambition, as mandated to us, is to come with findings from this committee, recommendations for the Assembly for 2023. Okay. And so that work will still begin this year. And please God, we reach a point where we can get things to be able to be at a point where we're unified around our purpose and where we're going, and be all pulling in the same direction.
Right. You mentioned the right in the front, who's serving as BU governors. I just want to ask you something, coming back to that point for a moment, Gary. It's all people that are experts or are well versed in particular roles of in both in secular, especially in secular roles, but that same compliance and legal issues apply to the church. And so just give a little bit of background to some of the folk that are on there.
Yeah, so it's definitely people with experience from the secular world. So Yolanda is her day-to-day function involves being involved in compliance for a big institution. Cliff Marshall has his own attorney practice, as well as is a legal advisor to another large NPO. Robert has trustee experience and has actually walked in the BU shoes for many, many years. Right. Stephen as well, and we can go through. I have a risk finance background. I'm a director of 2 NPOs. So I think collectively we're a nice mix in terms of what the union needs right now in order to become compliant from a governance point of view. And I think if anyone's out there who works for corporates or small businesses, I think we're all well aware of the fact that there's a lot of compliance issues, and we've got a little bit behind as a BU, and I think this team can get us up to date, and is a nice balance of people who can put the right principles in place for us to make the Baptist Union function more in a more compliant manner, and perhaps with a little bit more accountability than perhaps we've had in the past.
And of course, the Board of Governors is not fully populated yet. I think
No.
the EU constitution gives more scope for even more to be added should there be that necessity.
We're at our minimum of 5. Even the trustees are a little bit light, and we all know there's a few roles to be filled. So at the moment, we literally are just we could do with some more help in that area and some more people. And we don't want just people. I think we need skills-related people.
That's right.
Because there's work to be done, and we all have day jobs. So this is very much we put in what we can, and needing to move it ahead as quickly as we can in a very ministry-minded manner.
Gary, a question that often gets asked is, if we have a Board of Governors, what is the purpose of a National Leadership Council, what we call the old BU executive? And then also, how do the trustees fit in, especially when it comes to property things? Give us a bit of a background between those three entities and how they fit together.
Yeah, so it's a great question, and you have what's written down, and then you have the real world where we need to learn to work together. And I'm pleased to say that the governors have met with the NLC, I think twice this last year, in order to try and interact with them. For continuity's sake, we have both the NLC chair and the national administrator on our governor's board to help us to link it together. We also have a representative from the trustees. But using one-liners, you can always go and look at the Constitution if you want the full explanation. But we've kind of mentioned what the governors are about in terms of the mandate to us. The NLC really is an executive board that is responsible for the day-to-day running and oversight of the union. Is there to support the churches in a practical, hands-on manner, and I think that's just absolutely critical. The trustees, in their current form, are really representing the Baptist Union in all things classified as immovable property. And right now, if you were to talk to the trustees, to a large degree, they manage the property that is in the name of the Baptist Union for and on behalf of both the churches and the union. So that's their role. We might propose some widening of those roles in time to come. And then what we haven't spoken about really is the advisors, which we know will be put in place by the national ministry leaders. But right now we haven't got there. But that would be a board of, in a sense, of people that could minister spiritually to churches that need advising, counsel, encouragement, but at a very high level, and as well as working through the churches. Again, building blocks. It's all coming, and I think we're heading in the right direction on all those fronts.
Yeah, in actual fact, it's quite exciting to see how things have progressed even in a year since the last assembly.
Yeah.
Things have moved along. I remember those early meetings where we had to find our feet, but now things are up and running. We actually are able to produce results and produce reports and give report back to the assembly this year, which you are going to do, of course.
Yes.
So if you are coming to the assembly, you will hear the Board of Governors will all be there in actual fact, Gary, if I'm not mistaken. And you'll be able to actually talk with some of the boards of governors if you've got questions directly. I'm sure they will be quite glad to hear your comments and field those questions as best they can. So if you want to shake them by the hand at the assembly, he has your opportunity. Gary, the current focus of the Board of Governors, where is it?
So, Colin, it's a bit like eating an elephant. You're going to do it one bite at a time. And so where we've started is we've kind of stood back, as I said, created those portfolios. One of the starting points, certainly from my perspective, was we needed to see the whole, how big the Baptist Union was. And so we attempted to map it out in an organogram format, and perhaps it's not the best format. As opposed to being an accountability organogram, it's more of a universe, just showing all the entities. And I think many of us were quite surprised to see how many ministries are connected to the Baptist Union in one way or another. Some are partners, some are accountable, some are indirectly accountable. But we've put that together, and Stephen will show that in a slide at the union. And the idea there is not to discuss who reports to who or whatever, but just to recognize the universe and all the work that has been done, and understand that from a central governance point of view, we actually need to put some principles in place for everybody, let alone other factors that come into this discussion. So that's how we started the work, and you played a really big role in that for us, so thank you. But in addition to that, we've started to do a little bit of a risk review of the Baptist Union just to see where perhaps there are risks that we haven't taken into account. And there's some very practical things, like we are still very paper-based. And so there's lots and lots of files. There's a file on every single church in the Baptist Union. There's a file on every pastor. And we need to take that to a new generation and get it scanned in. We need to make that POPI compliant. And so there's a project coming on that. We are busy reviewing the property registers and having a look at all the property in the BU's name and making sure those registers are all up to date. And again, a level of automation, bringing that to the table. I can say to you that Garth Coppin and his team on the Finance Committee are probably leading the pack and have done an enormous amount of work, and certainly have got that to a level that most of us would be totally comfortable with. And if you know Garth's background, you know that this has been done in a manner that top corporates would do it.
Absolutely. And
so very comfortable with that from a governance point of view. But to complement that, we need to bring in an audit committee, and that's still work in progress for good governance. Huge focus on understanding the risks. In a non-profit organization, often people are so busy with the mission and the vision and where we're going and what we're doing that we don't realize that there's a whole world out there that puts a lot of accountabilities. We're not the only non-profit. There are many non-profit organizations. And so we have a lot of work to do to help the local churches at one level in terms of some of the risks and the regulations and the compliance that they should be complying with that many of them don't even know exist. And then we need to take it up to perhaps some of the networks, and then we need to bring it up to a Baptist Union central level, let alone some of the other entities. We're sitting at the Baptist College now. They must be facing regulatory challenges as well. And there'll be some things we can centralize and save everyone a lot of energy. There's some things that we need to just help the different single entities do on their own. We need to be careful of VAT issues. We need to be careful of there's a whole stack of things that are out there that relates to non-profits that we fall under as the Baptist Union. And from a risk universe perspective, we're doing a lot of work at trailing through everything and saying, can it be modernized, automated? Can we make it more compliant? And can we offer a centralized service to it? Or can we at least offer a decentralized education where we could perhaps put one of these together to help churches take someone on and register them for tax and do all the admin? That for a little church might be an enormous challenge. So the focus at the moment has really been about setting up the board, which I think Stephen's done well, defining responsibilities, and then identifying which things to do first. And we're approaching the governance and compliance first. At the same time, Cliff and his team are dealing any of the legal issues that are coming. We're pursuing the property, the assets of the organization. That's primarily the focus of the governors at the moment.
Certainly from the operational side and the NLC side, the old executive side, it's a great help to know we can turn to people who can give us advice, and good advice, not just a thumb suck and a perhaps, that we can get a good grounding in certain matters that average pastor doesn't really deal with on a day-to-day basis, and he's not called to deal with. And so it's good to be able to rely on an entity like the Board of Governors that can guide churches. To bring this webcast to a sort of a conclusion, Gary, I'd just like to say thank you from our side as the Baptist Union and the operational leadership, as well as on behalf of the churches, for all the work you guys have done. It has been much appreciated, and the Board of Governors have been well received by the churches. A lot of churches do speak to me, and they ask about the Board of Governors. It is something new, so they are interested and curious. And I think as your footprint goes out amongst our churches, I think it's going to be of great benefit. I must just say, and I mentioned before we had this webcast, what the Board of Governors are bringing to the Baptist Union is a sense of confidence. That when you give your money and your trust to us as an operational team to take care of churches' needs that they cannot perhaps take care of themselves, or when they give us money, that they entrust that money to us, that it's been well taken care of and well spent and well stewarded. And I think the Board of Governors' oversight over these matters certainly can build that confidence into the Baptist Union. And I think that augurs well for the future of the kingdom's work through the Baptist Union in the years ahead.
Yeah, Colin, on behalf of the those of us that are serving, thank you for that confidence and for the opportunity to serve like this. There's lots to do, but I think we have the right skill sets. We're lovely to get a bit more capacity with more skills and a little bit of time, and I think we will have this at a level that certainly will be recognised as being very professional and in line with what would be expected, certainly from a regulatory perspective and from an oversight perspective. And to your point, it takes the pressure off and in a sense helps everyone stay balanced, because sometimes when you're too close to things, it's very hard to make those decisions. But yeah, we all serve the Lord, and it's by God's grace we have what we have and the mission that we're on, and the governors just seek to play their part in that role.
So, Gary, thank you to you and the Board of the Governors, to you who are watching this webcast as it goes out onto the BU Assembly webpage and to the actual BU webpage as well. We'll see you in a few days at the Assembly, and looking forward to some good fellowship and getting together again. Thank you, Gary.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.